I can still see the soft afternoon light spilling across the long wooden floor of my parents' old house in Charleston, South Carolina. That house had always felt like some kind of monument to my family's pride, with its tall white columns, navy blue shutters, and the old porch swing that creaked every time someone sat on it. I grew up there, though it never really felt like a place where my voice mattered. Still, walking through those front doors again brought back memories I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish and old photographs, that scent you only find in homes that hold too many stories and too many secrets. Family from every corner of the country had flown in, filling the rooms with loud chatter, clinking glasses, and the kind of excitement that made my stomach twist. My mother had called it an important family announcement. I already knew what that meant. I had spent my whole life watching how they moved around my older brother, James Carter, like he was the King of England. I didn't expect today to be any different. James walked through the house as he owned it, greeting relatives with confident handshakes and that bright smile he used as a weapon. He always had a certain aura about him, as if the world existed for his convenience. My parents fed that confidence for years, praising him for every small achievement while brushing aside anything good I did. I wasn't bitter anymore. I had built my own life far from that house, running a modest property management office in Denver, Colorado, earning everything I had without anyone's applause. But stepping back inside Charleston, where the air held old patterns, made it hard not to feel that familiar sting. When the announcement time arrived, we all gathered in the dining room, a place I had always avoided. The long table made of dark oak stretched almost the full length of the room, surrounded by tall chairs that always made me feel too small as a child. Sunlight poured in through the large windows, warming the table so much it almost glowed. My cousins joked loudly near the back, their voices filling the space with a kind of careless joy. They had always admired James, and today was no different. Everyone seemed to be waiting for him to shine. My father cleared his throat and tapped his glass, and the entire room settled into silence. For a moment, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, something unexpected would happen. But I had learned a long time ago that expecting fairness from my parents was like expecting the tide to reverse. "We're here to confirm the inheritance decisions," he said, lifting his chin with the authority he never failed to display. My stomach tightened, but I stayed perfectly still. I knew how this story was supposed to go. Before he could continue, James pushed back his chair and stood with a flourish, raising both hands as if someone had called his name on stage. "So," he announced loudly, "Mom and Dad have decided that all 8 rental properties, worth about $2.4 million, are being left to me." The room exploded with noise. Chairs scraped against the floor. A few uncles whistled. My cousins clapped loudly, some even standing to toast him. One relative shouted, "About time," as laughter rolled through the group. His wife, Melissa, smiled as she had just been crowned royalty. The celebration looked so natural, like they had rehearsed this moment for years. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "We always knew you'd take care of everything," she said proudly, her voice trembling with emotion she had never once saved for me. I sat there quietly, my hands folded in my lap, my heartbeat steady. I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I didn't even blink. Instead, I watched my father. He looked relieved, as if handing everything to James was some long-awaited solution to a problem only he understood. People around me leaned forward, offering James congratulations, talking about plans, and making jokes about becoming business partners. Every assumption in that room pointed in one direction. James was the chosen one, and I was the girl who should be grateful for a seat at the table. Finally, after the noise calmed down enough for voices to settle again, I spoke. My voice didn't rise. I didn't shout. I didn't try to steal attention. I simply placed my words gently into the space between us. "Dad," I said, "you forgot something." The effect was instant. A few glasses froze midair. Forks stopped. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. It was as if the whole house inhaled and didn't know how to exhale. My father looked at me, confused. His fork hovered inches from his mouth. James' smile slipped a little, the first crack in his armor. Melissa's hand tightened around her wine glass, her ring catching the light. "What are you talking about?" my father asked. I didn't answer. Not yet. I let the silence sit. I let everyone shift uncomfortably. I let them feel, for the first time in years, that maybe they didn't know everything. Because I wasn't done. Not even close. The silence that filled the dining room was so heavy I could almost feel it settle on my shoulders. It was strange, really, because just a moment earlier, the air had been bursting with celebration, laughter, and the loud confidence that always surrounded James. Now the room felt colder, as if someone had opened a window to a winter storm. My father slowly lowered his fork, and the clink it made against his plate sounded painfully sharp in the quiet. The frown on his face was the same one he used when I was a child, whenever he thought I was asking questions I had no right to ask. "What do you mean?" he said, his voice low but strained. I kept my hands folded in front of me. My heartbeat remained steady. I wasn't scared, and I wasn't angry. I was just ready. I had been ready for 14 years. "You forgot what Grandma Eleanor did," I said. 14 years ago. For a few seconds, no one reacted. My cousins looked at each other, confused. My mother blinked at me as if she didn't understand the words. Then James let out a laugh. Not a big laugh, just a small, mocking one. The kind he used when he thought I was being dramatic or emotional or simply inconvenient. "Oh, come on, Emma," he said. "Don't start another one of your stories." But I wasn't the girl who let his laughter make her shrink anymore. I stayed calm because I knew exactly what I had carried into that house. I knew what I had held onto for over a decade. And I knew I had the one thing none of them ever expected me to have. Proof. Gran had always seen me in a way no one else did. When I was 13, she invited me to spend summers with her in her old white brick house in Savannah, Georgia. The house had a long porch with rocking chairs, the kind that made the whole world feel slower and easier. We'd sit there in the evenings, watching the warm southern sky turn deep orange. She would tell me stories about Europe, about her travels, about life, and about people who talk loudly because they fear silence. She said silence was power because it forced others to face themselves. Most importantly, Gran trusted me. She trusted my mind. She trusted my memory. She trusted that I would protect what she handed me. One hot afternoon, she took me inside her study, a room lined with old books and tall windows that let the sun pour across her mahogany desk. She placed a thick envelope in my hands and said, "Keep this safe, darling. One day you'll understand why." Back then, I didn't know what those papers meant, but I promised her I would protect them, and I did. Now, standing in the house where I had always been the overlooked daughter, I realized Gran had seen everything long before the rest of us did. So I reached into my bag and pulled out that same thick envelope, now slightly worn along the edges, but still sealed with truth. I placed it on the dining table. The sound of it hitting the wood was louder than it should have been, like a judge's gavel. A few relatives leaned forward. Others pulled back slightly, as if sensing something important was about to break open. My mother's voice quivered. "What is that?" I looked at her, not with anger, but with a calm she had never been able to take away from me. "These are the papers Grandma signed," I said. "The ones she filed with the county office. The ones transferring full ownership of all 8 rental properties to me." The shock in the room was immediate and sharp. My father's face drained of color so fast it startled me. My mother's hand flew to her chest. James stepped back as if someone had shoved him. The relatives who had been cheering minutes ago exchanged awkward looks, trying to understand what I had just said. "You're lying," James snapped, but his voice cracked in the middle. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply opened the envelope and slid the documents across the table. The official county seal, pressed into the thick paper, glowed faintly under the chandelier's light. My grandmother's signature was clear. The witnesses' signatures were clear. The recorded date was stamped cleanly on the bottom, 14 years earlier. "No," I said softly. "I'm not lying. You just forgot." But deep down I knew the truth. They didn't forget. They ignored. They dismissed. They brushed aside anything that didn't fit inside the world they built around James. My father picked up the first document with trembling fingers. He didn't say a word, but his expression told the whole story. He recognized the paperwork. He recognized the seal. He recognized his own mother's signature. A signature he had seen hundreds of times. My mother leaned over his shoulder, her face going pale. "This can't be right," she whispered. "It's real," I said. It was real the day Gran signed it, and it's real today. A few relatives gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others suddenly found the floor very interesting. The silence in the room was no longer cold. It was hot, heavy, and humiliating for the people who had just been cheering for James. I watched all of it calmly. For once in my life, I wasn't the uncertain girl sitting quietly at the end of the table. I wasn't the daughter who got overlooked. I wasn't the sister who had to fight to be seen. I was the owner. Legally. Fully. Without question. And everyone in that room knew it. The power they had handed to James minutes earlier didn't just shift. It collapsed. The certainty that filled the room earlier dissolved into confusion and fear. It felt as if the entire house had tilted, forcing everyone to grab onto something. For years, I thought silence made me invisible. But now I realized silence had made me unstoppable. The moment the truth settled across the room, it felt as if the air itself grew thick, like everyone was breathing through cotton. A few minutes earlier, every chair had been scraping, every glass clinking, every voice cheering for James as if he were some triumphant prince. Now every sound seemed trapped, held still by the weight of what lay on the table. The documents, my documents, sat there like a quiet storm that no one knew how to weather. James snatched the papers from the table, his fingers trembling so hard the pages rustled. He scanned each line, his eyes darting back and forth, his lips parting in disbelief. I had seen him angry before, frustrated, even smug, but I had never seen him shaken. Not like this. His confidence, the thing he wore like armor, crumbled inch by inch. His wife, Melissa, leaned toward him and whispered, "This can't be real." Her voice was soft, but even she couldn't hide the fear curling inside her words. My father finally found his voice, though it cracked like dry wood. "Emma," he said, struggling to steady himself, Why didn't you show us this earlier?" I met his eyes without looking away. For the first time in years, he seemed unsure, almost fragile. "Because you never asked," I said. "And because when Grandma tried to tell you, you didn't listen." His face tightened, not with anger, but with something close to shame. My Aunt Caroline, who had always worshipped wealth more than truth, leaned forward. Her gold bracelet clinked against the table as she asked, "So you're saying you own everything? All 8 houses? All the income?" Her tone wasn't shocked. It was envy wrapped in curiosity. "Yes," I said plainly. "The deed lists me as the sole owner. And the rental income has been going into the account Grandma set up for me. Legally. Fully." A ripple moved across the room, like a silent gasp passing from one relative to another. James took a step closer to me, his expression twisted in disbelief. "But Dad said they're mine," he said, voice shaking. "Everyone knows that. I've been preparing to manage them. I've been planning everything." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because I understood what it felt like to build your identity on something you thought was secure. But unlike him, I had learned early that life doesn't always hand you what you expect. You have to earn your ground. You have to stand firm on truth, not noise. "Performance isn't proof," I said quietly. "Documents are." He opened his mouth, ready to fight, ready to regain even a sliver of the ground slipping under his feet. But no words came. His entire reality, this idea that he was the chosen one, collapsed right in front of the very people who had helped build that illusion. My mother whispered, "Emma, your grandmother tricked us." I shook my head. No. She protected me. Protected me from years of being overlooked. Protected me from being treated like an afterthought. Protected me from the kind of favoritism that rots a family from the inside out. Around the room, the shift was visible. Relatives who had cheered for James moments ago now avoided his eyes. A few even moved a little closer to my side of the table, as if the truth had its own gravity and they were being drawn toward it against their will. It was strange to watch how quickly loyalty can break when its foundation was built on assumptions instead of facts. My father sank into his chair, pressing both hands against his face. His shoulders slumped, as if 14 years of denial had finally caught up with him. "This changes everything," he said into his palms. "It already changed years ago," I replied softly. "You just didn't want to see it." My words weren't meant to hurt. They were just honest. For so long, I had carried the idea that I was less, that my voice didn't matter. But sitting there, watching an entire room shift because of something my grandmother believed in me enough to sign, I felt something new rise in my chest. Not pride. Not revenge. Just clarity. Across the table, Melissa touched James's arm, but even she couldn't hide the panic in her face. She knew what this meant for their future. The plans they had made. The lifestyle they imagined. The financial stability they assumed would come their way. It was all slipping like sand between their fingers. My cousin Ellen, who had always defended me quietly over the years, looked at me with this small, warm nod. I hadn't expected it, but it gave me strength. Even in families like mine, truth has its own way of revealing hidden alliances. Dad finally lifted his head. His eyes were red, and for the first time in my life, he looked older than his years. "Your grandmother never told us," he said, almost pleading. "She tried," I answered. "But you always shut her down whenever she brought it up. Maybe because it didn't fit the story you wanted. Maybe because you thought James deserved everything automatically. I don't know. But she did her part. She signed the papers. She filed them. She made her choice." Silence fell again. Deeper this time. Not cold. Just honest. I wasn't angry. The anger had burned out years ago. What I felt now was something new, a strength I didn't know I had until the moment I needed it. Gran had given me more than property. She had given me a shield, a voice, a sense of worth. As all of them sat there, stunned, confused, and unsure of what came next, I understood something clearly. I had never been the weak one. I had never been the forgotten one. I had simply been the quiet one holding the truth. And now that truth had finally spoken loud enough for everyone to hear. The noise that had filled the dining room finally faded, leaving behind a thick hush that almost wrapped itself around my shoulders. For a moment, I stood still, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Some held guilt, some confusion, and others something closer to respect, though they didn't quite know how to show it yet. My hands were steady as I placed the last document back in the envelope. I felt strangely calm, as if I had crossed some invisible line inside myself and stepped into a new version of who I had always been meant to be. When I looked up, the room seemed different. Not because of the furniture, not because of the lighting, but because every assumption that had controlled this family for years was gone. I took a slow breath and stood, the legs of my chair scraping lightly against the floor. "I'm not here to punish anyone," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'm here to tell the truth out loud." The same people who had been cheering earlier turned silent instantly. Even the youngest cousin, who had been fidgeting with a napkin throughout the entire meeting, froze. My father leaned forward slightly, as though bracing himself for whatever came next. "These properties are mine," I continued. "That part won't change. But what happens next, how we move forward, is up to how you treat me now. Not the way you treated James for all these years." My father's eyes softened with something I rarely saw in him: acknowledgement. His stare was long, heavy, tired, a look that carried years of choices he didn't want to examine. "Emma," he said quietly, "we were wrong." "Maybe," I answered. "But I'm still here." My brother lowered his head, shoulders trembling slightly. The man who had once walked through the house like he was made of gold now looked like someone who had been stripped of a crown he never earned. His voice cracked. I thought I deserved everything," he admitted. "I thought you were just quieter, weaker." I shook my head. "Quiet doesn't mean weak. It means I don't need to shout to be heard." He swallowed hard. I could see the shame twisting inside him, but also something else, maybe understanding, or at least the beginning of it. My mother, who had always hovered protectively over James, burst into tears. The sound was small at first, just a tremble in her throat, and then it grew into soft, broken sobs. She clutched a napkin in her hand. "Please," she whispered, "don't leave us out of your life." I felt a soft ache in my chest. There had been a time when I would have done anything for her approval, anything for her affection. But now I understood something that had taken me years to see. I didn't need their validation to exist. I didn't need their praise to prove my worth. I didn't need their love to know what I deserved. "I won't leave you," I said. "But I won't let myself be treated as less ever again." The relatives who had cheered for James earlier now drifted toward me, forming a quiet semicircle of uneasy support. It wasn't loyalty. It was recognition. They knew the truth had spoken, and they knew where strength now stood. Even the cousins who had always chosen James's side hovered near me, their faces softened, their posture uncertain. The power in the room had shifted, not because I demanded it, not because I shouted, but because the truth came with its own force. The truth, backed by Gran's documents, her signature, her decision, it had set the room upright, exposing everyone's loyalties for what they really were. My father wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Your grandmother trusted you," he said softly. "She saw something we didn't." "She did," I replied. "And she tried to tell you. You just didn't listen." He nodded slowly, guilt folding into the lines on his forehead. I should have listened. There was nothing left for me to prove. Not to him. Not to my mother. Not to James. The truth had already done the work. For a few minutes, no one spoke. People shifted in their seats, wiped tears, and looked down at the table. The tension that had filled the room for years began to loosen, as if we were all breathing for the first time. I gathered the envelope, slid it back into my bag, and walked toward the front door. I didn't storm out. I didn't rush. I simply walked with a steady, quiet certainty that had taken years to grow inside me. When I stepped onto the porch, the warm Charleston night wrapped around me. The sky was deep blue, scattered with stars that looked like tiny sparks of hope. The breeze carried the scent of magnolia from the yard, mixing with the sweetness of the southern air. For the first time in my life, I felt completely grounded, completely sure of who I was. I stopped halfway down the porch steps and looked back. Through the window, I could see my family gathered in small clusters, talking quietly, their faces softened by something that looked like humility. As I stood there, I felt something warm brush the edge of my thoughts, something familiar. I closed my eyes and imagined Gran walking beside me, her soft step steady, her voice calm as always. "Let proof speak for you," she used to say. "It speaks louder than applause." She had been right. It spoke loudly today. It changed everything. I walked to my car with a peace I had never known. The night felt open, the road ahead wide and full of possibilities. For the first time, the weight of the past didn't press on my shoulders. Instead, I felt lifted, carried by truth, by strength, and by the quiet power I had always held inside me. And as I drove away from that house, I finally understood. That moment wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of my own story.